So I wanted to make this video kind of walking through how I made this concept recently and animated it in Figma. Usually when I'm making videos, it's just a time-lapse overview with no audio or voiceover, but I figured it'd be cool to show somebody that's interested in design or might just be entertainment. But so starting off, what we're gonna make, or not make, it's not gonna be a full tutorial or anything like that, but kind of just an overview of what was made and what I'll talk about today. And so it's this concept put out a few days ago where effectively if you're on your lock screen and you have a piece of media that has a thumbnail, it could be from music or video, when you pause the screen, when you pause the media rather, the text just currently doesn't look the best. It's so minimized, and we'll go through that. But created this concept where effectively the dynamic text work that Apple's already done with iOS 26 could in fact be used here to shrink or expand the text depending on if you're showing or hiding the media. And so I started off where usually if I am creating a feature concept for an existing app or an existing operating system like iOS, I'll start with screenshots because that's how I'm cataloging what I'm seeing. And it's also a good reference point because I'll use existing UI where possible and recreate it in Figma so that I can use that to create my designs. And this was the initial screenshot. So took effectively what I refer to as the large numbers version. Then I had a reference screenshot in the center here. I'll show in a sec for the small numbers. And then I had the kind of issue, if you will. And so when you have the media displayed, this kind of beautifully done and dynamic text shrinks into this tiny, just generic San Francisco presentation of something that I think iOS 26 does really well. And then it kind of just gets shoehorned here into this tiny little text. So what I did was I just took this screenshot, and when I'm recreating UI, oftentimes I will take a bold color like just a bright red or yellow or blue and use that because it's really easy to reference check when I'm tracing something or recreating something. And in this instance, I would recreate the numbers and then go through. And I would change over things as I went. So get the text color right for the day and date, and also have the status bar because wherever possible, I'll use a UI kit. And I used the iOS 26 UI kit from Apple, but it wasn't exact. It wasn't exactly the presentation of the signal bar and the Wi-Fi and things like that. So recreated them. And really, this is an area where I think it comes down to if you want to be the best at whatever your field is, it usually takes the longer route to make something and to do it quote unquote right, or to do it from scratch and make something that is as accurate as you can. And that comes down to this. Like I remade the Wi-Fi icon, the status, the cellular status icon's pretty easy, and so is the battery. But it comes down to that, just recreating something. If you can't find the exact reference image of it or the file itself, recreating it can be a great way to not only develop that skill set and keep honing it, but also to just appreciate what has been done before you. And a lot of times when I've done these feature concepts, I was created. The designers fix things, or sometimes that can be a little more objective than it really is. It's changing things to be better, in my opinion. So like little things like 8-point grid and using those metrics where Apple uses 14 points on the side for this particular scale. So I'll do an overlay like this to see, what the border radius is and what the corner smoothing changed, but that weren't implemented exactly as a designer saw it. And so what I do is by tracing over that actual screenshot, I can see down to the percentile that, okay, this is the corner radius smoothing. And so this is where the concepts start. And usually what I'll find is I know at the beginning what I ultimately want to create. The details might change here and there. And in this instance, it's little things like I'll get to a point where I'm happy with the design, but I know that I'm going to make likely significant changes coming up. And rather than use Figma's version history, which I've never quite liked, just a topic for a different video, I guess. But basically, you kind of have to go back in time, grab whatever asset you want from that version, then copy it, and then kind of set it next to the new version, come back to that. And what I do instead of that is just proactively set aside versions and just taking on at that stage of the process. And you'll notice in these kind of presentations, like a lot of times it'll come down to the idea is there, the concept is something, you know, I'm excited by, but then the reference asset wasn't correct. So I'll take a bunch of screenshots, because even in this instance, I noticed that because I had the stopwatch running, it would push up the rest of the media controls, and then that would push up the thumbnail a little bit more. And so when I'm making a feature concept, I'm not unaware of the fact that lots of people usually work on these apps, and so there's a lot of things to account for. However, if I'm presenting a concept, I want to do it in the best light. And what that means in this instance is removing those other UI elements, because I am just focused on the media player. And if you have another element like a stopwatch in the lock screen, that could push up the content more than I want it to be. And I really wanted to present this in a way where I could know this is the thumbnail size, and it's centered perfectly vertically and horizontally. And then this is the concept that built on that. And so there's 24 pixels between that, and then between the clock and the day and date. So that's why I'll move things and make different tweaks. And oftentimes in the final product, somebody might not ever realize that. And that's okay. It's not about making sure that you got it perfect with V1 or V2 or V3 or whatever it is, but it's making sure that you're happy with it. And oftentimes I label these versions because of that image. And then I'll look at it in preview, or I'll put it into the social media upload, and I'll look at it in that thumbnail and realize, oh, you know what? I didn't catch this, and now I'm seeing it. Now I need to change it. And then I'll come back and export a V2. And so it really isn't always, V5 or V7 that gets posted. Sometimes it's version 1, but going back, it's nice to be able to look at this. And so in this file, what I've done here is a pretty common trick, I would say, amongst people who have used Figma for a long time. But if this is something new, this might be a really useful tip. And what is really helpful in Figma is when you're designing in something that is, let's say, non-standard, like you're using the line tool, but you want to affect it with rounding of one corner later on. And you don't want to commit to outlining that object and flattening it, because you lose the editability of that. In Figma, what you can do is you can take, so behind the scenes is just this part of the 5 is just a line. And then what I've done is I've come in here and I've cut out a section of it, because if I didn't notch out this subtracted piece, that continuation would go past the part of the number that I don't want it to appear. And so I'll take this number and it'll show in a way that is a little easier to understand. We'll just take this whole time block. So all of this is merged together, and that allows me to affect it all at once. But I can actually ungroup this, and you're going to see it's the ugly red that we saw in the previous frame. That this is where I start with a lot of this stuff. So I can use it as a reference point for tracing, but I can also go back and know when I look into my layers and the construction of things that, oh, that's where I combined the shapes, because it was ugly. It was a red before. And so what I can do is subtract all of these things back. And all I'm doing is Command-Shift-G on Mac. So just ungrouping, the keyboard shortcut for that. And what this allows you to do is, so this outline here, if I want to add a rounded corner to this, there's a couple things I could do. I could take this object and I could I'm going to duplicate it. I'm just going to drag it over here to make a copy of it. And I could outline that shape. And if you need to affect just a single corner in a complex shape, this is what you actually want to do. And you can see how you can manipulate that shape. But what you'll want to do is keep a version of this. So always keep that second version, what I call the live shape, and then the flattened shape. But what you can also do, if you don't need to do that particular transform and you just want to round all of the corners equally, what you can do is Shift-Option-U, or it's just in the Union Shape menu. And now what you can do is you can just round the corners of this, and the shape itself underneath doesn't leave. So when you go into outline view, you can still see it's very faint here, but this is still a line underneath the surface, and on the top of the surface, it's a fill shape. And what you can do is this kind of manipulation where you can move something around, and all of these object transforms you're doing are still maintaining. And what you can do is stack that concept. So you can take this shape and say, now I have a fill shape. Now I'm going to subtract that amount, that room from it. And let me push the object forward and subtract that. And depending on what you want to round, in this particular instance where we're using the rounding feature, you can do those steps either in the order I showed, or you can switch them around. So I'll go back and I'll ungroup these to show what I mean. So in this object, I haven't rounded anything using the Figma built-in tools. So I've moved all these points around to exactly where I want them to be. But let's say I first want to cut away from this shape and then I want to apply the corner radius. If I take this object and I go ahead and subtract that, now I have my object with completely straight corners, as you see here. And now I can come in here and adjust the rounding of that object. And you can see that the rounding is something that as you start to stack the transforms, you can get really creative results. So all I'm doing is just duplicating. So underneath the surface, if you will, I'm just duplicating that rectangle and I'm moving it around. I'm changing the sizing, and then I'm adding more of these rectangles, just duplicating them. And you can live change all these shapes. So if I select this overall shape now here, and I'll change the color of it just so you can see the contrast. So we'll just give it a blue color. And now I can come back in here, and because I didn't destructively change that grouping, I can change the corner radius of this whole shape. The individual parts will change, but underneath it's still that line. So that's something that it's really helpful to keep in mind. It also makes the animation stage of this a lot shape you made and not the transformed shape. So before we get into the animation side, this is where in the end I wanted to have a single image that I could show before and after. And that also makes it easier for somebody who isn't immersed in iOS 26 and hasn't seen this exact UI. They can see, well, what's the point? What did you change? What did it look like before and then after? And then this is just the minor changes that a designer sometimes will make. Is same concept to this frame here, left and right, same exact concept, same images, slightly different presentation. So just a little more padding, letting things breathe a little more. You want to balance this where you have to know where you're going to post this particular content, because that will change the padding amount you give, but it needs to be well spaced enough that you can see it on a phone when you're scrolling through a timeline, but not so well spaced that it is lost in that page, and also not so close up that when somebody opens that on a desktop and they see it full screen, that they can't find the information because they have to go far left, far right, far left, far right on the screen to see everything. So this amount of spacing, it just comes down to kind of dialing in, depending on your content, the amount that is going to give you that balance. So once I've created these designs, oftentimes I will open up a new page in Figma and take those designs and make a prototype. It allows me to have just that prototype viewable, whether it's on a secondary display or a different device. But it also allows me to make those prototypes without ever having to change the flow starting point. So if I go into my other page, this is where I started, where I took that concept and basically what I refer to as the small numbers versus the large numbers, large on the left and small on the right. That is the starting point I had. But if I go ahead and do shift space here for a quick preview, there's things that I liked about the gradient and the inner shadow and all that, but there was so much that was shifting with each number, especially if you look at the 1, you can just see those the parts that are falling apart quality-wise, just the things that don't translate as well. And it comes from having this vision, having the concept for something, and then the execution is really, that's the important thing. That's what somebody's going to see. So it didn't turn out as I wanted it. And this was for a couple of reasons, but one of them is that the way in which to me as an outsider with no inside knowledge about, Figma and development there, it feels like the way that Figma Smart Animate works is it's using a combination in Smart Animate and guessing, interpolating how that object needs to change. That can be very accurate depending on what the initial shape is. But if you are changing something as seemingly simple, but as complex as a number or a piece of text, our brains are so good at recognizing numbers and text that we detect little things that are perceived as wrong. And so what I mean by that is when it's one shape, this particular shape has to transform both vertically with the stem, but then minor shifts in the angle of the top support here. So that was something that I noticed, and it was kind of a shame because I liked the effect of the gradient here and the inner shadow and how I presented things, but it was just going to be too many minor snags, if you will, like the minor inconsistencies, the minor imperfections that were going to make it harder for me to feel okay about a post. And it's not always about perfection. In fact, it's like perfection's impossible. So it's done is better than perfect. And when it comes to a daily feed where I'm posting every single day, it is that moment where like I'm going to have to post, like let's finalize things. However, if you have the opportunity to make it even just a little better, knowing it's not perfect, like take that opportunity. So I made a version 2 of this. And I kept version 1 because I wanted to be able to reference what I had done and grab those files if I needed them and go back and forth. What I've done here, and it's minor, but like once you see the comparison, I think it comes out pretty obviously. There's no gradient on these numbers now, but they're also broken up into core shapes, what I think of core shapes. And the inner shadow is gone as well. So the fidelity of the animation UI is lower than the final side-by-side. And what I mean by that is like going into here. So here's the side-by-side. Here's kind of the, the perfect version, if you will, where the side-by-side has the gradient, it has the inner shadows, and this is the stylized, the ideal version of that UI. But the animation has the vibrancy of the idea. This is the thing that catches somebody's attention, but you can see even in these frames, the 5 is the one that stands out with the most imperfections in between. And this was after a number of tweaks, and there just becomes a point where you have to realize that you're hitting your limits, and that's okay, but that you should still put something forward to demonstrate an idea and know that you can always get better. But if you don't put it out, then nobody's going to even see the effort you put into it, and nobody's going to have a chance to see the concept. And the concept's the important aspect when it comes down to, I'm not making this for production, I'm making this for a post. So the 1 and then the colon and the 4 are all pretty good. The 5 is where that falls apart. So if I were working on this for a product, I wouldn't be taking it to production in Figma Smart Animate. I'd be using After Effects for that, but I would also hone in on those details and fix them. But one thing I realized is when you break these shapes apart, now this support can transform much more easily because Figma is now just taking this element, and then when it's being brought into the second frame that it's animating to and then back from, it's just shrinking the height of this object. It shrinks the width a little bit. It's, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, a vertical reduction. So it goes from, I think it's like 160 pixel shrinking. So it goes from 372 to 212. Yeah, so 160 pixels. So it shrinks considerably to allow for this thumbnail to come up here. But by breaking these shapes apart, this was where it got much easier to diagnose problems, one, and also to have a smoother transition between the animations. So when I was going between these, taking those shapes, breaking them down, relayering them, and then the colon rather was just something where they're separate shapes, and then I could scale those from 28 pixels to 24 pixels wide, and I could reshape where they're sitting, and that became the final screen recording that you see in the post. And then from there, it's just a looped video. That's a rundown. This went longer than I thought it would, but 20 minutes. For a bit of knowledge, and hopefully people watch this on double speed. That's what I do with videos. So hopefully this is only a 10-minute video. And thanks for checking it out. Hope to do more of these. If you have questions, feel free. Like, respond to the post and ask any questions. Happy to walk through this with people and just provide any knowledge that I can. And hope everyone has an awesome day. Thanks for watching.